Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag-and-drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to the Next Reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Conan the Barbarian is over. It's time to crush our enemies and see them driven before us and hear the lamentation of our women.
Slave. Barbarian. Warrior. Thief. Conan.
They said you'd come. A man of great strength. Conqueror. One who could crush the snakes of the earth.
Purveyors of their own deaths.
He's evil, a sorcerer who can summon demons.
Day of doom is here! What daring! What arrogance! I salute you.
Out of age undreamed of, comes the most incredible adventurer of all. The man they call Conan the Barbarian. Coming to a theater near you from Universal Pictures.
Andy, I logged We Can Be Heroes to my Letterboxd account, letterboxd.com/ I don't know, Pete Wright, I think. I think that poor Robert Rodriguez it does not live up to the standard set by Spy Kids, that just cherished family adventure hooliganry that we love and laugh at. And now I'm left with We Can Be Heroes, and it was not the same spirit. It was confusing and horrible. But I will tell you this. I may not like the movie, but I will fight and die for your right to log it at letterboxd.com.
Oh.
I know. Did you see what I did there?
Yeah, you're like the Conan of Letterboxd.
I'm the Conan of Letterboxd. What's the deal with Letterboxd? Why am I so excited about Letterboxd, Andy?
Letterboxd is a fantastic site for movie lovers, for people who love to log what they watch and just kind of keep track of it, for people who like to review the movies that they watch and kind of write down their notes, whether it's for themselves or for other people, whether they like to, see what other people think of movies and comment and talk to each other about these other movies and build lists. It's a great place for film fans worldwide and to just kind of get into conversations and talk about movies. And Letterboxd provides anyone who's listening to The Next Reel an opportunity to get a discount for Letterboxd membership. They have a free platform, but you can also upgrade to Pro or the patron level, and every level offers you more benefits. And with the discount for The Next Reel, you get 20% off when you sign up. And that's even if you renew. You just go to thenextreel.com/letterboxd to get that discount.
And so you're not, if it's confusing, it's thenextreel.com/letterboxd with no trailing E, BOXD. That's how they spell it. If you've been curious, if you've listened to the show for a while and you've wondered what is up with Letterboxd, what do they keep talking about? This is what we keep talking about. And you should check it out if you love movies and you love lists. It's just the only place to go is Letterboxd, thenextreel.com/letterboxd. Sign up or renew today. Andy, this is the second movie in our Oliver Stone, the Oliver Stone origin story series that we're doing.
It is, yes.
Yeah, the making of a mercurial movie magician, Oliver Stone. And it's Conan the Barbarian.
Finding his footing in his film career. That's right.
It sure was. This was a controversial piece for him. He didn't direct it. He wrote it. And what we see on the screen is some of what's left. Is that a fair way to characterize it?
It's hard to say how much of it is actually his. It's funny that this is in our series. I mean, he was involved in it for quite a while. He was very deeply into this story. Edward R. Pressman had bought the rights to this. It was a very complicated process that went on for several years trying to secure the rights to the story because he and somebody else thought it would be a really interesting story to tell, the whole idea of Conan. And of course, he brought, they wanted a name writer to come on board to write this script. And Oliver Stone was just coming off of winning an Oscar for Midnight Express. And so he came on board. Now, according to him and everyone at the time, he was going through, as they say, a period of addiction to cocaine and depressants. And his script was written under the influence of the drugs. And the result of what John Milius, who ended up directing this film, called a total drug fever dream, albeit an inspired one. So we'll probably talk about that a little bit more here, but needless to say, Milius did come in once he was on as a director and thinned things down quite a bit. And I shouldn't say just because of what the script was, but also because of what the budget for that script would have been. They estimated that the budget for the script that Stone wrote was probably at least double what they ended up spending on it. So a very, very expensive and very big film. And Oliver Stone actually said this film really kind of set up a trilogy. We have this, there's Conan the Destroyer, and they'd planned on Conan the Conqueror as a third film. But Oliver Stone himself says that he wrote this with visions of this being one of 12.
Wow.
He wanted this to be the next big James Bond type of film, and that every couple years, Arnold Schwarzenegger would come back and play this character again in yet another adventure of Conan on his journey through whatever his country is called, Hyperia.
Yeah. I think this, he was, about 30 years too early for that. I think I think we live in an era now where the media appetite for those big series at studios is higher. And I wonder if, given 30, 35 years, they would have been able to, that same team even, just move them in time, would have been able to do something. It does make me curious about other Conan properties, because I don't feel like at any point we can say confidently that Conan has, quote, taken off on the big screen. Is that fair?
I think it's interesting to see the evolution of fantasy. I always grew up reading fantasy novels. That was my novel of choice, was reading fantasy. I just loved it. I loved science fiction too, but I really just got into fantasy. But there were levels of fantasy, like what J.R.R. Tolkien was creating with his worlds. And then I think you had artists like kind of the Conan, Boris Vallejo, that really was like this, Frank Franzetta, who is, he did a lot of the art kind of that they inspired the direction for this, that had this fantasy story type that was, it almost had an erotica element to it. Like people were clad, they were muscular people, they were clad in very tight outfits that were very revealing, and that also was a big fantasy element that was very, very popular. And I feel like there are elements, and then there's also the fantasy that I think, because of the fantastical elements, they felt it had to also have kind of a silliness to it. And so I think that there was an interesting balance of trying to find the right types of fantasy. I was never in the stuff that wasn't just a more serious sort of fantasy. And that's why I feel like perhaps it's easier for people to latch on to something like Lord of the Rings that just feels like, like real stories that are just in this fantastical world, as opposed to something where everyone is also running around in, swimwear.
Swimwear. I see what you did there. They were naked. A lot of them were just naked, Andy. So we'll get to the slave orgy in a second. I think it's I think that's interesting. I was an Earthsea guy. Like I was big into Ursula K. Le Guin, and that just led straight into Lord of the Rings for me. And so I was on that side. So I never really connected with Conan either. And I always thought of it as fantastical kind of poster artwork, and the sword to the sky, and the muscle bound, and all that sexy stuff. I think when I was a little kid, I attributed it to people who listen to punk rock music or hard rock metal, like metal music, because there's some similarities across cultural appeal, and I never really liked the music, so I never understood it at the time, and so why would I like these properties that celebrated this stuff? So I was very confused by this kind of fantasy when I was very young.
Yeah,
and when Conan came out, it was not it was not a part of my cultural sort of collection of touchstones. And so I just missed it and didn't see it until much later. So didn't know a lot about it.
And I think also, again, this was made with a little more of that erotic sensibilities.
Yeah.
So I think to that end, it was not made for the family. So it wasn't something our parents were taking us to. And I would argue, or I don't even know if it's an argument, but I would just say neither of our parents were probably the sort of people that were into this sort of property and wanted to take us to this type of film. At least I know
it's
mine
not something
weren't.
where Dad saw the trailer and was like, "Oh God, we got to go see Conan."
Yeah.
Certainly was not. I don't know in hindsight if that would change. If I'm the dad that would see the Conan. I mean, when did the reboot come out? Was that 2011?
2011, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't that dad then. My kids were much, much younger, but
it also wasn't a good movie, Pete.
I never saw it. Did you see it?
Yeah, I'll tell you about that as we get toward the end of our conversation here, if there's time.
The real question for me about this experience, though, all that is leading up to how much Oliver Stone is in here, right? How much does this movie showcase the big themes that are sort of super internal to Stone that he makes movies about, right? What does he take away from this experience that shows up in his other movies? And I think there are a few points in here that are probably worth talking about how power and masculinity and these sorts of cultural tropes are woven into Conan by Oliver Stone, who then goes off and makes Wall Street, which is essentially Conan in suits.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously John Milius is very much that sort of person too, right? I mean, his career is full of very masculine sorts of stories. Like, I mean, Red Dawn, he worked on, Apocalypse Now, the Dirty Harry, Dillinger, the A-Team. Like he is involved in a lot of these stories that deal with people who are, just a very masculine type of person. And, not always. He's not always doing those sorts of stories, but I think it fits that he ended up being the person that came on. So I think a lot of that also likely was pulled from him and what he was doing. But I think to that end, that's kind of why he and Stone, their sensibilities in telling a story like this made sense, and how he was able to take what Stone had done, this 4-hour epic. I mean, this is what I read about Stone's version, in which the hero champions the defense of a princess's kingdom. Instead of taking place in the distant past, Stone's story was set in a post-apocalyptic future where Conan leads an army in a massive battle against a horde of 10,000 mutants. Very different movie.
Yeah.
But a lot of the different scenes and elements within this story, more of the stuff toward the beginning of the film, like when Conan is crucified on the tree, when like the whole bit with the Tower of Serpents, the raid on his village as a child, all of that stuff was stuff that Stone had pulled from the stories and written and adapted into this script. And so there still is a lot about this child growing up and becoming this warrior that Stone pulled, and obviously he was drawn to the material. I mean, he was very, very passionate about it. And I think that's why, even with Milius changing so much of the script and adapting it, I think you're right. You're still seeing a lot of ideas of this masculinity that Stone was drawn to in the Conan source material, and that he adapted and helped create the cinematic world here.
Yeah, right. I think this whole idea of, trust the sword, men let you down, right? Trust the sword, trust the trappings of power, the tools of power, because humanity will fail you all the time. And so part of the arc of Conan is trying to resolve himself, that there are people, there are humans that can be trusted above and beyond the power that comes with the trappings of war and fighting. That's a theme that come up against with Oliver Stone all the time.
I think just following on that, I think that whole riddle of steel is exactly that, right? The whole idea that there's this riddle of steel that his dad talks about to young Conan, and how this is this powerful tool that you have, but as Thulsa Doom later says, it's the man wielding it that is really the one who you should fear. It's not the sword itself; it's the man.
Yeah,
and that absolutely is something that does speak to Stone. It's the man is the power, regardless of what weapon he's carrying.
Another one, the value of that man as the conqueror. To your point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a celebration at the end, as it becomes easy to dissolve that sweet hot snake energy at the death of Thulsa Doom, because the value of the man who wields the steel. And I think that's an interesting way to weave these themes into a movie like this that where I think that allow Stone to tell stories that are particular to his nature in a way that makes it seem pretty easy. So in that regard, I think it ends up thematically interesting, even if I have quibbles with the movie itself.
I actually I find it to be quite an enjoyable film. I mean, there are issues that I certainly have with it. It's not like the greatest film, but I really appreciate what they were doing here. And despite that kind of more going down the Frank Frazetta Vallejo style of warriors, that I think this was largely the complaint that people raised when Wonder Woman was being made, and how there was so much praise for what Patty Jenkins did, in that you don't always have to have the women superheroes running around in skin tight revealing outfits, and that's I think why Wonder Woman was a success, and that's why I think there was such this comic book mentality with some of these things, and that early fantasy that was just too revealing. It's like, why are people running around fighting in these sorts of clothes, where they're next to nothing, men and women? Like, it's nonsense. And while that is in this film, I certainly appreciate that what they're doing is really working to create an interesting world. Like, they are actually doing not as good a job, but essentially what Peter Jackson was doing several decades later with the Lord of the Rings films, where they're trying to create, and I feel like they actually do create this epic sense of this world. Like, I feel like there's a lot going on in this particular land that they're in. And, watching this film, I'm like, wow, I really wish that Conan the Destroyer had been better, and that they had really been able to find the direction for this. Because I think that they were on an interesting track to make something, pretty unique with it at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it there's a lot of stuff in it that I feel is just a little, kind of, it falls by the wayside.
Let's talk about Conan then, the slave boy turned conqueror.
Yes. Young Conan, watching his parents. He's Sumerian, and there's a lot of people in this land. I'm not sure
so many people
how they all relate, but anyway, he is Sumerian, and apparently they don't cry, they don't express their emotions, according to his buddy that Subutai, who cries for him later. I will say, the scene when Thulsa Doom and his band of raiders raids Conan's village, I found that to be effective, and I especially found the scene with, after everyone's killed, it's just Conan and his mother, and apparently a bunch of other children that we don't see at that particular point, but they kill the mother. And the way that Doom does that, I find really compelling, because I think that speaks to this hypnotic nature that this villain has. I really liked it. I sense that you might have some issues with how it all played out.
I just was confused by a lot of it, and I was so struck by his long, dark locks on James Earl Jones that maybe I was...
And those piercing blue eyes, too.
Yeah, maybe it's possible I was hypnotized by the entire thing. I thought it was a little bit confusing, and I don't think they did a great job early on of setting the stage of who the people were, because I thought the guys who were doing the fighting, and then James Earl Jones comes up, and is he like a Merlin character? I didn't recognize that he was the head for the longest time, and so I just think it was, early stuff in the movie that maybe you're not supposed to understand. I found that sequence, I didn't understand what he was trying to accomplish. Was he trying to turn her somehow? Was he trying to bring her into the Legion, and then he beheads her, and it makes for a nice and shocking moment? I get that in hindsight, that his hypnotic power of snake charming her was lost on me until much later. To the point where you actually had to tell me, no, he was hypnotizing her. I was like, oh, right. Yeah, so that's how long I had to wait to understand that.
I really found it to be incredibly effective. I just loved the way that he has this look that basically kind of weaves its spell upon her, and she lowers her sword. And then the beheading, the way that that's filmed, where you're focusing on young Conan and you can just see him and he's holding his mother's hand and you see her body. And as Thulsa Doom spins around to behead her, you cut to that shot of the boy and you just see mom's head drop through the frame and then her body topple out. And he's just left looking at his now empty hand. I was just like, wow, that was a really powerful way to construct that particular moment in the film.
I thought that was really interesting too, because the way that was framed from his perspective, as we cut to that reverse shot from him and he's looking at his hand and there's a sword right above it as if the sword is going to somehow fall into his hand. It's quite a prophetic bit of cinematography there. I thought that was great.
Yeah. And then he becomes a slave.
Yeah. Then he becomes a slave. Now, here's the thing. My understanding is that, as we've sort of discussed, this Conan is a different Conan, and the Conan in the Howard books was more educated and more suave, and this one is and would never have put up with this whole slave making bit, the slave making nonsense and getting on the wheel.
Maybe not, maybe as a kid, but certainly by the time he's an adult and, as a pit fighter and stuff, he might have fought that. Yeah, because the quotes that I found about the original stories says, the Conan in the books detests restrictions to his freedom and would have resisted slavery in a violent fashion, whereas the film version accepts his fate and has to be freed. And then Robert Garcia's review of the film in his American Fantasy magazine states that this Conan is less powerful, less talkative, and less educated than Howard's.
Yeah.
So I think that speaks a little bit to this. And, perhaps some of that came in from the way that it was written by these two people writing the script. And perhaps some of that also was working with Arnold Schwarzenegger in a role that for him was largely a big breakout opportunity for him, but also really was hard for him because his accent was still so thick and he had to work on it quite a bit, even just to get what we're getting in the film, which is still pretty thick.
Well, is that part of the reason? So in the earlier drafts of the film, the narrator, it was actually Conan who was doing a lot of his narration. If you read the script that's linked is the third draft Milius script, and all of the stuff from the narrator for after the early bit is actually Conan talking about his own sort of origin story. And I find that's interesting that all of that had been switched to the narrator wizard, the Mako character.
And the bit of him sitting on the throne that we get at the very end, which I think is fantastic. And that was at the beginning, and you hear him with his narration at the beginning, and it was just a little too much. My impression was that it was too much, the accent, and so they moved it to the end and had Mako do all the narration instead.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, and I wonder if that would have made, what's your sense? Do you think it would have been if they'd had a character that they could maybe had a little bit more mature facility, if they'd had with English, right, and not the heavy accent? Do you think it would have made for a better Conan?
Well, originally they were talking about Charles Bronson, Sylvester Stallone, William Smith, actors in the 70s who had played, tough guys, until they saw Schwarzenegger in an early rough cut of Pumping Iron and said, "Oh, he's perfect. Look at him. He looks like Conan." But then it's just then they did have to deal with the accent. So I feel like that had to come into play a little bit.
Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah,
I wonder, and even a slightly later Conan. Again, this movie being ahead of its time, a slightly later Schwarzenegger, I think, would have made for a very different Conan. Give him another 5 or 10 years, and he sounded like a different guy.
I wonder how that would work. And, they're still constantly talking about doing another Conan property with him. And, it makes me wonder. I think by this point, people just, even with his accent, people still, I think people are so used to him because he had been around for such a period of time that I don't think it's as much a concern anymore. Even if his accent's a little lighter.
He's a different performer now, right? I mean, he's just I find his post-governor roles to be even more interesting than his pre-politics roles. I found him to be really compelling in what was there was the that zombie one he did that was so good. Was it Maggie?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that was just really, I really enjoyed my time with that movie. And it showed a whole different side of Schwarzenegger, the actor. And I think I may have been lonely in my appreciation of that movie. I don't think it did well. But I honestly think that energy, that Arnold Schwarzenegger energy and that Arnold Schwarzenegger performance would make a great post-Kingdom Conan the King, right? I mean, I think he could pull that off. I feel like this would be a great time to catch up with him.
Apparently, it's been announced. It's one of those things where they've been talking about making the Legend of Conan for pretty much since, and it's still something that's in the works. It's even on IMDb listed as announced. So who knows? As announced, yeah. All right. Well, I would take it. I like him. I think he does a great job in the character. And I think that, I don't know, he's just fun and he ends up working well. And it's funny because that was something in this film where the three leads, Conan, Valeria, and Subutai, are all essentially beginners. Like,
yes.
Jerry Lopez, who plays Subutai, he was just John Milius' surfing buddy who had been in his film Big Wednesday beforehand, and Milius thought that he would be perfect as Subutai, so brought him in. And Valeria, Sandal Bergman, she had been in All That Jazz, which we've talked about on the show, as one of the dancers, and he had seen her, and Bob Fosse said that she would be able to move like a warrior, and that's why they brought her on. So essentially, three beginners helming this big studio film, and it's pretty interesting. And that's, I guess, why they brought in James Earl Jones and Max von Sydow as two people who had more experience to kind of help bring these ones up a little bit. And Mako, too. Yeah.
I love that she goes on from here and makes Red Sonja and She just a few years later. And all of them have exactly that same vibe. Clearly, I think she was great, and she had a real sort of stamina for this kind of movie.
And I think some of that it's a stamina, and then I think also it's getting pigeonholed.
Yeah, we could call it that.
A little bit of both. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. We didn't finish our conversation about the slave transformation, because that sequence on the wheel is it's a wheel and it just goes around. And the whole time I kept thinking, like, as we're watching him with these successive cuts to age him on the wheel, as if he's been doing this for, 20 years, he gets stronger and stronger. And I kept wondering what muscles would actually develop if there was somebody on the wheel and they were doing this. Wouldn't they be horrifically lopsided?
Maybe we never see. Maybe periodically they stop everybody and have them turn around and spin the other way.
I couldn't let that go. I could not let that go. Like, I wanted to see a giant right side and a skinny left side. That's what I felt like needed to happen.
It's an odd setup, because my understanding of the wheel is it's purely to weed out the kids, to figure out who's worth training to be a pit warrior, basically. And they basically have them walk around this thing. As we see over time, the population working the wheel grows smaller and smaller until it's only Conan as the one sole survivor of this wheel torture thing. Because I was like, well, maybe they're making corn or something, crushing wheat. I don't know what they're doing with it.
That's what I was hoping.
They're spinning it in circles forever. What is the point? But I don't think there is a point other than to weed them out and to figure out who is going to be the one that they use as a pit fighter. Such a strange, and it takes years. So, like, what's the point of this strange thing? But they call it the Wheel of Pain. I don't know. I don't know if they're doing anything with it or not. It just seems very strange to me.
Well, there is another thematic point, which is the futility of man, right? I mean, that's just anytime you put a wheel as a symbol, like this never-ending cycle of not that leads to nothingness. It is a commentary on futility, and in this case, I mean, we're building this slave, this warrior. That, you know, what does he symbolize at this point in the movie? He symbolizes nothing. He symbolizes the futility of his own cause until he's able to break those shackles. And so it is an interesting symbol, if a ridiculous exercise.
Well, and the whole thing is a little odd to me because he basically goes from that into being a pit fighter. And it's there he seems to find his, as the narration kind of describes, it's his sense of purpose. Now he lives for it because he gets people cheering him on, and he kind of thrives on that whole idea of being this successful fighter. But then all of a sudden, it's like his owner just decides to free him one day, and I was just like, "What? Why? Like, what all of a sudden happened? Did I miss something? Like, what was the reason for him getting freed?" Okay, so it was poorly explained. I thought maybe he had aged out of it or something.
No idea, especially because he had fit, right? He had fit into this model. Yeah. He was a fighter, and all of the narration told us that he developed a bloodlust, and he just beat up guys and killed them. And that's what his job was. And he was happy.
Yeah.
He had been brainwashed. And we have that great brainwashing bit, you know, where he's being tested and taught and, you know, and yet then he demonstrates, I guess, a sense and sensibility toward women as they bring the concubine into his thing and everybody watches.
Right.
And then he like wraps a cloth around her and then I guess goes and has his way with her that we don't see off screen. But I found that a puzzling contradiction in who Conan is.
Well, and maybe that's part of the point is that he's a barbarian, but he's not a Planet of the Apes style human where he's just going to have his way with a woman. He's going to make her feel not as embarrassed by being naked in front of all these other people and cover her up, even while he still follows through with his, you know, the whole point of bringing her over to his bed to bed her. And so it was peculiar, but I was like, okay, this is an interesting way to depict him where he doesn't want to just, you know, throw her down and take her. He wants to make her more comfortable and then take her. And then
throw her down and take her.
Yeah. So,
well, he didn't throw her down. There was no
he sets her gently and then.
Yeah.
It's odd. It's an odd sense. And this is the story about this person who doesn't find any benefit in humans really, other than to kill them or to screw them. And, you know, he does finally befriend Subutai and eventually Valeria. And Valeria is really the human character of the story who falls for him and wants to run away with him. And wants to kind of have this life of just being happy together, even though he can't let this revenge bloodlust that he has go, and has to follow through with taking down Thulsa Doom because of what he did to his village and his parents, and to get the sword back. Although it's a little unclear. It's like, is it? I mean, he finds the sword, he uses the sword, but I wasn't sure. Like, was it just to get the sword? I mean, maybe it's a fault of the script that Conan is so untalkative. We just aren't completely sure if the sword has anything to do with it, or if it's just his parents, or really why he's pursuing all of this.
Well, because there were two swords, right, that we're dealing with.
Thulsa Doom takes his father's sword, right, which is called the Master's Sword, but then he has the Atlantean sword that he gets in that little cave place.
And this is a fundamental problem with the fetish objects in this film, because when you have a fetish object, when you have like the treasured object that the main character is going to, you know, is on his search for, that propels his search, right? As I thought was being set up to be the king's sword, right? His dad's sword. Because we have that opening credits bit that is so just lustfully chronicling how the sword is made.
Yeah.
does not serve the story as well to distract the viewer from that search, right? And when he finds the Atlantean sword and takes possession of it, it becomes very much his sword. It is a showcase sword. It is, by all rights, more beautiful than the king's sword. It's longer. It's his. It becomes part of his identity. And so I never quite came to terms with, are we still looking to avenge his father and get that sword, the other sword? Because that felt important in the beginning, and it becomes decreasingly important as we move on.
And that was something I was trying to figure out, because, he does have that chat with Thulsa Doom the first time that he comes and attacks, and they actually talk about the riddle of steel. This is right before he ends up getting crucified. Yes. And that, I'm like, okay, so is this kind of his turn as he starts realizing that the sword doesn't mean as much? Because eventually, and I'm pretty sure it's his dad's sword that he has that ends up breaking, but because I think it was that other guy who had been holding it at that particular point in time.
Yeah, I agree.
And yeah, so it's a little muddled as what we're trying to say here. But I was like, okay, maybe through all of that and the fact that Conan, does end up using the Atlantean sword, it's not about the master's sword anymore, is a sign that he's learned something. But it's so unclear. And while not a specific problem with the film or anything like that, it's definitely something that I was left questioning. I'm like, well, what was the reason for that? I don't know.
I'm glad that you thought that, because I found it a confusing choice, right? Confusing narrative choice. I don't know how you could explain that and not somehow be jumping through logical flaming hoops to make it make sense for the character motivation. So I get that his journey is to ultimately to retrieve this. He's the equalizer, right? It's to retrieve this princess for her dad.
Right.
And that's our ultimate journey, but also to figure out who he is, right? It's to take his place in the annals of history of Hyperia or wherever. And I think it was kind of a confusing road to get there. And maybe that's a result of script changes, but it was tough.
It was tough. And, it's one of those stories where it feels of its time, it feels very masculine. It's less concerned about the women in the story and their place in it as it does the men in the story and their place. Like Valeria, she is so in love with Conan that she can't let him die. And she even says, I would die for him. I won't let him, whatever needs to happen. I will sacrifice myself if that's what it takes in order to get him back to life. And Mako does that whole ceremony, and they have to stop all the weird ghost things that are fighting him or trying to steal him and stuff. And actually, I thought that was really effective. I liked that scene. I thought it was really cool. But then on the flip side, when she gets struck by the snake arrow, Conan doesn't act the same about her as to how she acted for him. And if they're this in love with each other, it's like she's willing to sacrifice herself for him, but he's not willing to sacrifice himself for her. In fact, she's willing to die and he's willing to accept her death. Yeah. And she even comes back after she's dead as a spirit to help him in that one particular moment. And it was such a one-sided way to tell that particular story. And that's something else with fantasy in that particular period, is it felt much more for the guys than it did for the girls.
Yeah, I was wondering where you were going with that, because is that a critique of this film or a critique of the entire oeuvre? Well, because it felt very natural to me, because I never got the sense that Conan dug her as much as she dug him. Never once.
No, but but I think that speaks also to just how these men were telling this masculine fantasy story. Yes. They could never have a man be willing to sacrifice himself for her.
Right.
But it's okay to have her. It's like such a, the way that system was structured back then. It's just like I couldn't see Oliver Stone or John Milius, either of them, writing this any other way, especially in the late 70s.
That's a really good point. Of course. Yeah, of course we would land there. Yeah. The other thing I think was interesting is the overarching story from the very beginning sets the stage that they live in a time of misinformation, right? That this is, and they use some of that language over and over again, that this is a guy, that this Thulsa Doom lives in a tower and he is presenting misinformation to the people. And when we have a meeting with our barbarian Santa Claus King, the father played by
Max von Sydow,
we get a sense that he is saying, I'll give you anything to bring my daughter back. This guy, he's a cultist and he has bamboozled her. She believes these things that aren't true anymore. Like, she's been taken in by this guy. And that's that. I found that interesting given the times in which we are living, right?
Yeah, right.
That ultimately Conan the Barbarian is kind of a QAnon story, right? It's a fake news story. It's
conspiracy theorists,
conspiracy
cultists.
Theory story. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that is really interesting to me because he used the same, like, talk about prophetic, like using some of the same language around these people and trying to find a hero who is capable to see through it and not get hypnotized by it and to cut it off at the very top. That is an interesting thing to me about this story. I did not expect it. I didn't remember that for sure.
It's a really interesting element, and I can really see how that was an element that I think that Stone, certainly knowing how much the world of politics and conspiracy theories and all of that would kind of fuel his stories later, as we'll start talking about some of them, and some past the point where we're going to talk. But he certainly continues evolving that study, and knowing that they were reaching, in the 70s when they're working, there were plenty of these sorts of stories that they were able to pull from the time about people getting brainwashed into these terrorist groups and cult groups and all of this. And I think it felt very much of the time for them to be telling this particular story. And you're right. It's just, it's a little off-putting how much it fits in today.
Well, and that he was coming off of, just our lived cultural experience of Watergate and, all of these things as he's working through some of these stories. Like, you can feel some of that political insidiousness seeping into this story. The other interesting thing in his script, Conan does not become king at the end of his story. That she offers her hand in marriage so that he can become king, and he says, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to marry into power, right? I'm not going to marry into royalty. I'm going to earn it. And he leaves and rides off into the sunset, and we don't have the woe is be the king final shot.
Yeah.
Which I think is another really interesting and such a trope that Stone grabbed onto, right? That heroic, that mythic, that larger than life honor is bigger than anything kind of aesthetic. I think is I'm missing that. I kind of wish I didn't know that now.
Yeah, and I can really see how they were very much convinced at the time, both Stone and Milius, this is going to be a trilogy. This is going to be one of 12. This is the setup for all that other stuff that is to come.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And last point, and we can run through getting it done. But a last point is just the way they use that masculine energy. We made a joke about, that sweet snake energy. But really, I mean, that Thulsa Doom exudes his power by taking his limp snake and making it hard like an arrow and shooting it into a woman is extraordinarily on the nose for the literary analysis crew.
Reading into it, that I think absolutely is there. But also, I just have to say, in the world of fantasy, that is actually a really cool element that they bring in here. The fact that he can take this snake and pull it into an arrow form and shoot it. I was like, okay, that's really cool. Even with all how you can read into it. I just thought that was pretty slick.
How can you not read into it?
I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying it's just cool. It's just a really interesting fantasy element that they're incorporating in with all of its phallic symbology.
As a guy who celebrates snakes to the extent that he does, right? And how hurt he was when Conan killed the giant snake, which I actually thought was really cool. There's a lot of terrible green screen in this movie, just of a time. And, there are some cool use of the puppetry and mechanics and things like that to make that snake work. I
don't know how much green screen there. I mean, there might have been some, but a lot of it was actually traveling mats. Also, they were using a lot of mat shots throughout.
Mostly, I was looking at the sky replacement in the very beginning when he's having the most important conversation that he'll ever have with his father before his father dies. It's so stupid. It's just really bad. And so it's terrible green screen. Anytime there was a green screen, it's terrible. But you're right. A lot of traveling mats. I thought the snake was cool. There were some cool effects, like big effect sequences in there in the good fight. And he kills it. And then Thulsa Doom is like willy-nilly taking his little snakes, turning them into arrows and killing them. I assume. I guess at the end, when Conan pulls the snake out of Valeria, is it still alive?
It's still and he tosses it. So I assumed that it slithered off. It didn't seem like it was necessarily dead. But
you do not want to be one of those snakes, though.
I need to talk a little bit about this, though, because I don't think it's a confusing point, but I do think it's a frustrating point. The fact that here we have Thulsa Doom, this really, I think, effective cult villain, and I just will say, one of the things that has been burned into my brain since I saw this as a young teen is the scene where he has the people so hypnotized that he waves this woman forward who is up high on this kind of this wall. They're all standing on these kind of these ledges, and he waves her forward and she jumps and kills herself. And that has been locked into my brain forever. And the power of cults and all of that, I was just like, that was incredibly effective. I loved all of that about Thulsa Doom. But he's got this giant snake, and yes, it's a cool scene. They did what they could with it. I was like, if it had been modern, that would have been a lot more action. As it is, it's just, there's not a lot of action in the snake fight, but it still is cool to see. But then we have Thulsa Doom turn into a snake, and nothing happens with it.
Yeah.
I was like, that was such an interesting thing that we get to see him turn into this snake. And like, I don't even know why. He just turns into a snake and then slithers out of the room. And that's kind of all. It's like he does it before he even realizes. I don't think he's doing it to escape.
Because he's not moving. As a snake, he's not moving with any sort of intensity. He just is like, I'm done, mic drop.
And he seems like he's almost through the wall before anyone realizes that these people are attacking. It's just, all of it is so strange. And then at the end, he never does anything else with that. I was like, well, if, turn into a snake and attack these people. I like what they do. I like him getting beheaded and Conan throwing his head down and all that. Like, it fits in the cult story, but the nature of him being this snake, snake walker, I guess we'll say, it ends up falling flat for me.
I find it really frustrating because I don't think we needed it. Like, I think it's okay to make the cult leader, that he somehow has a power over them, and I'm going to call it charisma, because that fits my mental model of this. But, turning him into a snake is taking it a bridge too far, especially to your point, where they never actually make any good out of it at all. Like, they never give us an opportunity for a final battle, that he's in this final evolved form, and that's who Conan has to face. And I think part of the challenge that they have there is that Conan already fought the big snake at this point, right? Like, it would have been... it would have been hard to have a second battle against the snake. My question is, why didn't they just cut those few clips of him turning into a snake at all? We didn't need it. It doesn't add anything to the film, and it's more of a distraction for the power of his character as a human.
Yeah, it's a distraction, but for me, it's more of a distraction because I think it's super cool, and I think that they did it because it is really great effects. Like, I think the effects work actually for the time was really cool. I thought they did a great job with the
I
actual
love the way his
transformation.
face kind of throbs
As
kind
it's
of moving.
stretches forward and stuff. Like, I thought all of that was really good. And I'm sure that's why they didn't cut it, because it was such a cool thing. It's just, if you're going to do that, build it into the story more. And, honestly, I don't think the second one ever dealt with any snake people that would have given us more of that. It's been so long since I've seen Conan the Destroyer. I just don't have the memories of it that I did of this particular film.
Yeah. Yep. I don't know. Worst case scenario is that it's just sloppy editing, and maybe it was intended as an escape, and they just put it in the wrong place by a few cuts, right?
Yeah, right.
Did you want to talk about you and the orgy and your son at any point?
Yeah, well, since you bring it up like that, now I feel like I have to tell that story. It's one of those things. This is one of those films that I remember as a kid, or not a kid. I watched it when I was a young teen, and so my son walked in as I was watching it, and I happened to be in the middle of the orgy scene, and so I paused it because I heard him coming, and his question to me is like, "Why are all those people naked?" And I just said, "Oh, they're not naked. It's just really hot. They're in the desert, and they're just all in their swimsuits, and they're just laying around because it's so hot." And, when it's paused, maybe you can buy that. I just, I didn't want to go into that conversation with him at that particular point about that particular scene. What can I say?
I need to talk to you about slave orgies. So,
first, get a cheetah. Or not a cheetah, a jaguar.
They did bring a big cat to the orgy.
Yes, they did.
That's got to be symbolic. But I do think that my daughter and my wife walked in over me during that scene too, and they were like, "Oh my God!" And I said, "Yep, it's a slave orgy." And right then, the conquering hordes come in, and we have possibly my favorite character in the movie, which is Guy wielding comically large hammer. That apparently has no weight at all, and he's also the guy who gets hit by the Predator style spring-loaded punji stick and later in the chest, and that just led to riotous laughter from my family about the guy with the giant hammer who has to carry the giant hammer at the slave orgy. It just doesn't get better than that. So, anyway, it was that was a frustrating scene for those reasons, but at least you had a memorable moment with your son.
Yes, yeah, one to talk about at some point later for sure. Going back to the cast real quick, we've kind of talked about the main performers in it, and we've mentioned Mako popping up as the Wizard of the Dunes or whatever the Wizard of the Hills. I can't remember what the location he's in, but that you brought up, and I just think it's funny that we need to bring up again the man wielding the giant hammer, and so we have these two thugs that are essentially Thulsa Doom's right-hand men, Rexor and Thorgrim, both of which I think have fantastic fantasy names. Rexor is played by Ben Davidson, and he is the one with the giant hammer. Former football player, played for the Oakland Raiders, and I don't know if he popped up in that many films, but I think that he's certainly of the type that had a look. He was. I should say he actually was in a number of TV projects, but not a lot of film stuff. But then the other one, Thorgrim, is played by Sven Ole Thorsen. He's a Danish actor, stuntman, and bodybuilder, and a strongman. And I feel like he is somebody who must have been, through his time as a bodybuilder, somebody who hung out with Schwarzenegger, because he is in a lot of Schwarzenegger films. He has been in Conan. He was in The Running Man as the bodyguard Sven. He was in Predator as a Russian military advisor. He was in Gladiator. He was in Mallrats. Just tons and tons of stuff. And oftentimes he's working just as a stuntman stuff. Oh, Red Heat, Twins. He was in those. Oh, he's the Russian chief in The Hunt for Red October, Total Recall, T2 Judgment Day. He's the security guard at the Galleria Mall. And it's just like there has to be some connection between the two of them, because he's ended up in so many of Schwarzenegger's films, 15 of them actually, as of 2006.
15.
So there you go. Yeah,
Wow.
And that makes him 12 as an actor, 3 as a stuntman or a trainer. That makes him Schwarzenegger's most frequent collaborator.
No kidding.
There you go. Yeah. Oh, and here you go. Schwarzenegger brought Thorson and other of his bodybuilder friends, like Franco Columbu, with him to shoot the movie. Later, when Thorson moved to the U.S., he met Schwarzenegger again while he was acting in the movie Commando. Thorson helped with some of the stunt work in that movie and quickly found work in many of the subsequent Schwarzenegger films.
You got to have buddies. I'm curious we didn't see Max von Sydow in 15 other Schwarzenegger films.
Apparently, he took to Schwarzenegger and actually gave him, like when they were working together, quite a bit of little bits of acting advice.
I think that's awesome. I can totally see von Sydow doing that.
Yeah, I think that's great.
That was great. I mean, there's every performance in here is just wonderfully over the top. I think this again, to my constant refrain that this movie was before its time. I think Duke Callahan did a fine job with the camera as best he could. I understand there was some shakeup behind the camera on this movie, and I can't find the original DP. Do you know?
No, I didn't hear about that. So interesting.
Yes. And I think that's worth at least thinking about. Just that there was some consternation around getting the film shot the way it needed to be shot. And I think I actually think it given what they had to work with and the budget they had to work with and the locations they chose, I think it was shot in Spain, right?
Yeah, they were originally going to film in Yugoslavia, but the country was kind of falling apart. The head of state had just died. The country was collapsing, and so they moved over to Spain and filmed it all there.
I think they had plenty to work with. It was barren, and I think it made for a fine setting. I think generally the cinematography worked for me. Given the tone and tenor of the film. Do you have any complaints?
No, in fact, I think a lot of that, aside from the camera, comes from Ron Cobb, who's a designer I've always been just really fascinated with. Kind of the drawings he does, the work he does. I think he is incredibly compelling. I mean, he worked on stuff like Dark Star, Star Wars, Alien, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Back to the Future, The Abyss, Total Recall. I think that he's just an incredible design talent, and seeing what he did here to create this fake history, essentially, because he went back to a lot of those ancient drawings from the Dark Ages and basically made an all new version of everything. None of it is, based on actual, reality. He kind of took elements from all of these things, like the Vikings and things, and just blended it all together to create a whole new fantastical world here. And I thought he did a great job.
How'd you feel about the costumes?
I think they fit in really well with the design also.
Except for the pants. Okay, and I know any of the women's costumes are ridiculous.
Even the men's. And this, it just goes back to my issue with this style of fantasy storytelling. Is like, why do people have to be wearing such skimpy outfits when they're fighting with swords and axes and things like that? Yeah. You should be wearing more armor, not running around in bikini bottoms.
Yeah, it takes forever to find the stupidest little shield. Yeah. Like, nobody has shields. They just throw stuff around at each other. But there's one sequence where there are some standout Schwarzenegger pants. And they're like parachute pants, but instead of being like full balloon legs, they're straps. And I thought those have just gone in this movie too far, because they are not only useless as protection, but also a detriment to any sort of fighting. They would catch on everything. Everything.
Yeah.
So I think there's just a lot going on in costumes and design that look cool, but practically they just it just made me question around every corner. Like I can't fully get lost and invest in this world because so many things in here are silly.
Yeah. It's
So,
the struggle
with
with
that.
practicality when you're creating these worlds. And there's a look at, but then there's the practicality it's balancing.
Okay, so the score, Basil Polidorus.
I mean, it's fantastic. This is one of those scores that I feel has become somewhat iconic. The French horns when they kick in, just the way that it's just got kind of this driving beat, and I just feel like there's a beautiful, fantastical element to it that works really well. I just love listening to this score. Always have.
I do too, and I had completely forgotten it. And this is one of those experiences where when as soon as these major themes come on, I find, oh my goodness, I can hum that. Like I know where it's going. And I found it really, really lovely. I think Basil Polidorus did some fantastic work.
And I feel like he actually pulled some of that operatic element of all the chanting and everything. Like as I was listening to this, I was like, this has elements, and I can see where he drew from to do the score for The Hunt for Red October with kind of the Russian chanting that we have throughout that score.
Yeah, absolutely. Although there is one sequence where the music drop doesn't work, right? Where the cue doesn't work for me because they sneak into the red lit cave on the side of the mountain, and then the chanting starts, and it feels suddenly like I'm supposed to imagine all of the slaves in here are singing, and it does not work for me at all because it changes to changes to The Hobbit. Suddenly, all the characters are singing. So that didn't work for me. But in general, I really, really love the score. I think he did some great work.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
This is not a good movie if you're a horse or a dog, even though they did give the dogs little hats.
Yeah, this was the American Humane Society or American Humane Association. They put this film, this is on their unacceptable list of films in the treatment of animals. There's the dog that gets kicked, the camel that gets punched, and the horses that get tripped for those throws, all of which were done without consideration for the animals. And it's one of those things that is a little frustrating. I don't remember Conan the Destroyer, but apparently there is because of the outburst that people had at the time of the mistreatment of the camel, there is Conan getting spit on by the camel in that second film as a way to kind of, close out that, provide a payoff for the setup in this film. I don't know.
Did he actually punch the camel? Did you see him connect with the camel? Because I felt like I saw that. I was like, there's no way he connected with that camel. It looked fake.
No, my understanding is that he actually punches the camel.
Man, that's a shot.
Yeah.
Right there, punching a camel.
Yeah, low blow.
I don't know that I'd...
blow.
Yeah, low blow. Nobody punches a camel.
Nobody in this town. Let me tell you.
Well, I'll tell you, it was a good experience going back to it. Whatever the Oliver Stone themes that landed in the final version of the movie that we see on screen, I did enjoy seeing these hints of Stone to come. Do you have any facts and tidbits that we need to review?
A couple. There was the swords that were made. Obviously, they weren't making like real swords for people, and the ones that they did kind of create were very well crafted. But it cost a lot of money. They made 4 of the Master's swords and 4 of the Atlantean swords. Each sword cost then $10,000 per weapon. So
wow.
Yeah, so that's just $80,000 just getting those swords made for this. They did make copies of the sword. Now, I think this is cool. The Atlantean sword, they copied it. I'm assuming a much cheaper replica version of it. And they made those to give to members of the production when they finished. And I was just like, oh, how cool would that be to track one of these things down and just like have it on your wall? One of the Atlantean swords that was a production gift.
Yeah,
very cool.
That's a great takeaway. Do you think? Yeah, I'm sure Arnold has his sword, right?
Who knows? I would think the way that the movies are, it's so hard to pin down who gets what and why. And
Here's an interesting thing, because I know we have to talk about the video game. And one of the things I know about the video game, and all of the Conan video games, and in fact, many games just in general, is that there's a lot of running where characters have to run across barren wastelands to get from here to there, hither and yon.
Yeah.
I think it all comes from this movie. Because these guys run on foot everywhere. Did you notice that? They run everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
When Conan needs to be rescued in his big crucifixion scene, his buddy comes running across the desert to fix him. There's just a lot of running.
This is something Peter Jackson must have pulled directly from Conan, because when we see a lot of their characters, they're just running through Middle Earth.
So much running.
Yeah.
This is why I would have been a shopkeeper. Some sort of merchant. No running.
Right.
So what do you think about the video? Did you ever play it?
Well, okay, so speaking of the video game, because there have been a number of them, but the one that I played a lot as a kid was Conan Hall of Volta, which actually came out for the Apple II, the Atari 800, and the Commodore 64. I only ever played it on the Apple II. I might have had the Commodore 64 version because I had a Commodore 64, but I may have been done playing this game by the time I had my Commodore 64. I can't remember.
Yeah.
I played this all the time, though. My friend introduced me to Conan, the movie, and to this video game. We played this game, this little, kind of data soft game all the time. I loved this game. You had to run around. You had the swords that you would throw like boomerangs, and you had to get gems. It kind of was almost like a pitfall, as you're kind of doing all these different things. And
Load Runner. The first Load Runner.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I loved this game so much. It was a blast. And still, like, looking at images of it online, I'm like, oh, it brings back so many memories.
Yeah. Then they came out with it wasn't really a leveler, right? You weren't like trying to clear a level. The next ones were like Mortal Kombat style, like character against character, right? The barbarian fights kind of a thing. And so you'd fight a character and you win. But I think the most recent one was that they made was it the Exiles in 2019?
Exiles was in 2017, and that was a PS4 game. I don't know if Conan Unconquered, that was the 2019 game. I don't know if that's out or not yet.
It's just people love their Conan games. I haven't played any other ones besides the first one.
No, yeah, me neither. Yeah, but I loved that one.
There is a whole period in here. I've just stumbled on a wonderful video, Conan the Barbarian Game Evolution, which shows some playables from each of the games between 84 and 2019.
Oh, cool.
And it turns out that they actually have the female characters clad even worse, if it's possible, even worse than in the movie.
Oh, of course they do.
It's really terrible.
Of course they do.
They're just naked. I mean, if we're just calling it, they're just naked characters running around with swords. It's not great. All right.
Well, it did have the sequels that were made. Conan the Destroyer was made a couple years later, directed by Richard Fleischer, and it was supposed to be something that would spur on the third in the trilogy, Conan the Conqueror. And of course, there was Red Sonja kind of thrown in there. Conan the Conqueror was supposed to be the third one, released in 87, because Schwarzenegger was committed to making Predator. Then Dino De Laurentiis' contract had expired and didn't want to renegotiate, and it fell into development hell. And eventually, I don't think I ever knew this, Conan the Conqueror eventually was revised and reworked into making what became a Kevin Sorbo vehicle in 1997, Kull the Conqueror.
Yes.
I had no idea that it had come from the Conan the Conqueror story.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was a generic spin-off.
Yeah, so weird. So weird. Then, of course, there was the remake in 2011 with Jason Momoa playing Conan. That's the one. I have seen that one. And it was a presentation, an interview with the actual screenwriter of that particular film, talking about why it was such a mess. And it was actually more just about the writer and his career. But we actually got to one of the writers, I should say. We got to watch the film and then sit down and have this conversation with the writer as to why it it fell apart. And it was because really, like, so many cooks in the kitchen, everybody wanted a different thing out of that movie. And he kept getting hit up by everyone at every turn. Hey, I need you to rework this so that this is happening. Hey, I need you to rework this so this is happening. And so by the time you see the end result, it's just like nonsensical things happening because everybody had different reasons that they wanted to get the movie made. So
it sounds like we should call ourselves lucky that there were only 2 on this one.
But, there still are talks, as I said, of doing this Legend of Conan. Although now, I don't know if this is just because of the shift with TV and what you can do in TV. Now there is talk that it may actually be a TV series instead of a film.
I might watch that.
That would be interesting. And I would be curious if it was Arnold Schwarzenegger coming back to be in some capacity.
Yeah. No, I would definitely check that out. As a Game of Thrones fan, I think I'd like today's take on that.
Last little tidbit that I think is worth pointing out. We didn't really talk about the original source material at all for Conan, but Robert E. Howard, who created Conan, there was a movie made about him and kind of this love story that is completely not Conan-centric, but it was called The Whole Wide World, came out in 96, and it is Vincent D'Onofrio and Renee Zellweger in that particular story, directed by Dan Ireland. But if you're curious about the person who is behind Conan, that film is out there as well.
How did it do at award season?
This, fantasy, it fit in those sorts of awards. Interestingly, Sandal Bergman ended up getting more notice than a lot of her co-stars. She won at the Golden Globes for the new star of the year in a motion picture for a female. Over at the Saturn Awards, she also won Best Actress. The film was nominated for Best Fantasy Film, but lost to The Dark Crystal. Best Music, but lost to E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Best Costumes, but lost to Tron. And Best Makeup, but lost to Poltergeist. I have a hard time arguing any of those.
Not a single one. Yeah. I wouldn't say a single one.
Yeah, and then at the Razzies, Arnold Schwarzenegger did get nominated for Worst Actor, but he lost to Laurence Olivier in the disastrous production of Inchon.
That's it. I can't tell if that's an auspicious loss for Schwarzenegger or win for Olivier. That's rough.
I feel like Schwarzenegger, all he had to do is just walk around saying, oh, yeah, I was up against Olivier.
Lawrence Olivier, yeah.
I lost to Olivier. What are you going to do? He doesn't have to say anything else.
How to do at the box office? Make some money?
Well, Milius' film cost $20 million to make, which is $53 million in today's dollars. Considering the god-awful remake in 2011 with Aquaman himself, that one cost $90 million in 2011 dollars. I'd say Milius at least knew what he was doing. The movie was released May 14th, 1982, opposite The House Where Evil Dwells, The Return of the Soldier, and Wrong is Right. I've heard of none of those movies.
Not a one.
This film ended up hitting the number 1 spot, held it for 2 weeks, but was bumped in week 3 by Rocky III, another film we've talked about on this show. By week 6, it had fallen out of the top 10, but the film was still a success, earning $39.6 million domestically and $40.9 million internationally for a total adjusted gross of $213.1 million. That was a great success for the film, which landed it with an adjusted profit per finished minute of $1.2 million. A great success, but perhaps the one that benefited the most was Arnold Schwarzenegger himself.
Yeah. Talk about a guy who was able to turn this into iconic performances all the way around throughout his career. What an incredible thing.
Definitely. Yeah.
What do you think? Should we take it to the mat?
Nah.
All right. So we'll skip Flickchart this week.
Let's just skip it.
All right. Head over to flickchart.com/thenextreel. You'll see all the movies we've talked about on this very show. If you swipe over in your show notes and tap the word Flickchart, it should take you straight to Conan in the Flickchart database, where you can add it to your list and see how it stacks up against ours.
First up, Conan the Barbarian or The Birdcage.
The Birdcage.
They both have things I enjoy, and they both have things I have problems with. I feel I'm going to say Conan.
All right, man. What am I going to do?
You're going to fight me on it.
Yeah, well, yeah. I got to fight you on it.
Okay, here we go.
Here we go.
One, two, three.
Paper.
Paper.
Scissors.
Oh,
okay.
Right out of the gate. Birdcage takes it. Conan the Barbarian or Stripes?
Oh, Stripes.
Conan.
All right.
Here we go. One, two, three.
Rock.
Scissors. Oh, look at you. Stripes takes it. Conan the Barbarian or Labor Day?
I'll let you take the lead on this.
Yeah.
You're Conan?
Yeah, I'm Conan.
I'm also Conan.
All right. Conan the Barbarian or Star Trek Insurrection?
Star Trek Insurrection, please.
I like the villains so much in Insurrection.
Do. So much.
Really do.
You do.
I'm going to say Insurrection.
Yeah.
Conan the Barbarian or Major League?
Major League.
I'll say Major League. Conan the Barbarian or Bull Durham?
Bull Durham.
I was wondering where you were going to go on this one. I will say Bull Durham as well. Conan the Barbarian or Near Dark?
Probably Near Dark.
I'm going to say Conan.
I'll give it to you. I don't even need to fight about it.
Oh, all right. Conan the Barbarian or Lake Placid?
Lake Placid.
Yeah, I really enjoy Lake Placid. Conan the Barbarian or Giant?
Conan the Barbarian.
Conan the Barbarian. Well, that lands Conan the Barbarian pretty low on our chart, 424 on our chart out of 490, which is a 13%. Very 13%. Low. Very, very low.
Works for me.
Wow, really?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, there are things in this movie that are fun and interesting to think about and talk about. And still, I didn't it's not a movie I'm going to be real excited to go back and watch again. I think I've seen it several times in my life, and I think I can close the chapter. Yeah, close the book.
Interesting.
I'm done with Conan.
I love the fantasy world that they create here. I actually have a lot of fun with this film. I have a lot of problems with this film, but this is like way too low for me. It landed in spot 1629 out of 4552, which is a 64% on my chart, which feels much better for me.
It's a 1111 on my chart out of 1485. And that takes it to it. Apparently, it's a 25% according to the algorithm over at letterboxd.com/thenextreel. If I had my way, this would be a 1.5 star movie.
Wow.
I'll give it that, and I will also give it a heart.
Oh, you're so giving. 1.5 with a heart. Okay. For me, this is it's an easy 3 stars. And a heart. I think that there's a lot of stuff going for it. It's far from perfect, but I still have fun watching it. I had a great time. I love this world. I wish the film itself was stronger, but with what they have here, I think they do a great job. So 3 stars and a heart for me. So that gives us an average of 2 3/4. 2 1/4. Sorry.
Yes. Okay. I think that this movie is probably the weirdest prelude to every other Oliver Stone movie that we would have to talk about. Am I right? Where do we go from here?
I don't think so. If anything, I think The Hand was a weirder one because it's a kind of a peculiar. I mean, I think there's something Stone-ish with that one.
Well, yeah. Let's just say we're on the curve.
But we're going from this particular masculine figure to another very masculine figure. We're going to be jumping to Brian De Palma's Scarface.
Yes, we are. And actually, now that I say all that, I think this may be the perfect prelude for Scarface.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, this is, of course, Al Pacino in a very iconic performance as a Cuban immigrant, Tony Montana, as he is kind of becoming the drug lord down in Miami in 1980.
I have an old friend who knows a lot of quotes and doesn't know a lot about movies, and just about every movie that has any sort of accent to it, he thinks comes from Scarface. So... badges? We don't need no stinking badges. That's Scarface. Are you talking to me? Scarface. Totally Scarface.
Wow, interesting.
Everything goes through Scarface.
Weirdly, he doesn't think "Say Hello to My Little Friend" comes from Scarface at all, right?
No, that's from the Muppet movie. This is great. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Letterboxd giveth, Andy.
As Letterboxd always doeth.
I wasn't going to start with the low ones, but the low ones were too funny.
Yeah, right.
So I got kind of sucked in.
You were already low. You're supposed to go high.
I know. I was supposed to go high, but I didn't.
All right. What did you do then?
Well, this one is actually not funny, but it totally, I think, it encapsulates the experience that maybe I didn't have personally, but can completely imagine because I didn't see this movie as a kid. It's from Grudley, who gives it a half star and says, "It's amazing to me that I thought this movie was AWESOME. Awesome as a kid and literally could not get through it as an adult. Even breaking it up over the course of a couple of days was too much for this movie."
Jeez. Ouch.
I think I could see that experience happening to me. I just really personalize it. Where'd you end up?
Well, I have a half star by the snake emoji who had this to say about the film. "I counted at least a dozen Conans and one Barbarian, but no one ever called him by his legal Christian name of Conan the Barbarian. Damn shame."
He is risen. Thanks, Letterboxd. It's hard to believe we have been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
You're telling me. Producing this show week after week is so much fun, but it does require a lot of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our Originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchase is made through our links. Give us a small commission at no extra cost to you and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
We covered a lot of great movies that were adapted from other material in Season 10.
Our Originals page at thenextreel.com/originals is where listeners can purchase the source material behind all our adapted film discussions. It helps support the show at no extra cost when you buy through our links.
In our foreign language Best Picture nominees series, we looked at several adaptations, including Z, The Postman Il Postino, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Letters from Iwo Jima.
We hit the high seas with In the Heart of the Sea from Nathaniel Philbrick's nonfiction book for our Aquatic Killers series.
Definitely a weaker entry in that series.
I bet the book is better.
Oh, me too.
Member bonus episodes featured adaptations like Gone Girl, The Russia House, Ivanhoe, The Hot Rock, The Big Heat, and Naked Lunch.
Oliver Stone brought not just original stories, but also adaptations like Conan the Barbarian, Scarface, Year of the Dragon, 8 Million Ways to Die, Talk Radio, and Born on the 4th of July.
Mary Herron's disturbingly insightful American Psycho was adapted from the Bret Easton Ellis book.
You like Huey Lewis in the News?
Oh my God, it even has a watermark.
And of course, more Stephen King with The Mist, The Green Mile, and The Shawshank Redemption for our King a la Darabont series.
Find links to all of these books and more adapted films on our Originals page. That's thenextreel.com/originals. Every purchase supports our show.
Get the full list of books that we've talked about and start your next read today at thenextreel.com/originals.